Greetings, friends of astrobiology. Welcome back to a brand new episode of Ask an Astrobiologist. This show is made possible by contributions from the NASA Astrobiology program, ELSI, the Earth Life Science Institute, and the nonprofit Blue Marble Space. In this show, we celebrate science and celebrate scientists, and today is no different. My name is Sanjoy, and we are very lucky to have Dr. Alexis Templeton of the University of Colorado at Boulder as our guest today. But first, it's your monthly background quiz. So, Mike, if you could put up the background from last month, where we featured these very strange shapes from a land far, far away, at least from our studio here in California, in the United States. And one person got it right, and congratulations, Shayna Kendall, who's tweeting as NASA JPL fan, who correctly identified the site as the Pilbara in Western Australia. And these features are actually evidence of life that occurred on Earth 3 billion years ago, and they're called stromatolites. So they're essentially microbial mats that were kind of building up in shallow water, and they were looking for the light. So as they go up, you know, they have little filaments that baffle the water, the sediments drop, and the cones grow. And because they're baffling sediment, rock lasts a long time, and they're now available for scientists to study. So this is what life on Earth existed 3 billion years ago. It's almost goosebump generating. This month, this is the background. Hopefully it's a lot easier for you guys, because on Monday, a spacecraft called Juno overflew this feature at an altitude of 9,000 kilometers. So grazing the surface of this environment, and I welcome you to share with us what you think this environment is, and you can do it either on the SegaNet chat or on Twitter with hashtag AskAstrobio. If at any time during this interview you have questions for Dr. Templeton, please use hashtag AskAstrobio on Twitter to let us know, or use the SegaNet.org chat. All right, enough about me talking. Welcome, Dr. Alexis Templeton, again, Professor of Geological Science at the University of Colorado Boulder, as well as the lead principal investigator of the NASA Astrobiology Institute's Team Rock-Powered Life. And we'll talk a little bit about that during this interview. But first, Alexis, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Hi, Sanjoy. It's great to see you. I always love talking with you.
Thank you. And as we like to start in these interviews, is actually turn back the wheels of time a little bit. And to begin, like, how did you become a scientist as a kid? Was there any particular event or stories that triggered this lifelong interest in science?
It's a good question. It took a long time, I think, for me to recognize myself as a scientist. I think I always had an adventurous spirit, so that was more of my earlier lifestyle, was really enjoying being out and traveling in the world, both with my family, and then over time I did a lot of outdoor programs, the equivalent of Outward Bound in Knowles, and outdoor educator programs. And so that drove me to go to interesting places, and then I started to ask questions about the landscapes I was in, and found myself sucked into the field I am in now, in the geosciences. I would never have guessed as growing up I'd be a geologist by training, but that underlying interest in chemistry and in outdoors came together in that way.
Indeed, and rocks are indeed the history books of the planet, and learning how to read them uncovers the most incredible story, at least I find, and perhaps I'm a bit biased, that one has ever looked at. So, but you are also a microbiologist, right? Your current research deals a lot with microbes. How did that path unfold at university and beyond?
So I didn't take any biology actually in high school or college. Probably shouldn't admit that, but I was working in New Zealand after my undergraduate. I was doing a master's down there, and again, I was really interested in dynamic landscapes. So I had gone to New Zealand because they are mountains that are forming today. They rise 3 kilometers up from the ocean, and they're through active plate tectonics. And I went to study the chemistry of the hydrothermal systems in New Zealand, and to do that through isotope tracers and other geochemical tracers that we were using. And every time we tried to interpret the signals and the minerals that we were studying, they didn't make sense through any of our models. So I had to start reading microbiology literature, and at this point in time it was in the early 90s, and the only process that would make sense for the signals we were seeing was that there was organisms making methane. And I didn't know much about microbial methanogenesis, but it was the first metabolism that I learned about. And I later was given a job. I worked for the U.S. government working on bioremediation because of that research, I'd started to learn how do you trace signals of biological activity. So I essentially started to learn microbiology on the job. I was given opportunities to take classes and go to biology departments and embed microbiology into my research. But it came from the side rather than a directed course of study that I did earlier on in my career.
So it becomes clear that it's harder and harder to untangle geological processes from biological processes because they overlap quite a lot. So you mentioned bioremediation, which is of course the use of microbes to fight pollutants caused by human activity. Is that something that you're still pursuing, and in what environments what kind of pollutants were you fighting against?
Yeah, I'm not working in that area anymore, although I teach some aspects of that. So when I've taught equivalent of geomicrobiology classes, we look a lot at how organisms are harnessed to convert, say, toxic forms of metals into non-toxic forms. And at this point in time, when I was working for Department of Energy, we were looking at breakdown of petroleum hydrocarbons. So that's where the methane component came in, because we would look at how bacteria could be stimulated to break down hydrocarbons to just convert them to methane, then oxidize the methane, eat it, and release the CO2. And how you could accelerate that process. So that was a lot of work with engineers and chemists and microbiologists. So it was also the very beginning of being pushed towards a interdisciplinary point of view of how you tackle any kind of complex problem. So I think it's a hugely important area of research. I love seeing students go into areas of bioremediation, but I myself I'm not studying it directly.
Yeah, so I could see that you had the seeds of an astrobiologist even before you became an astrobiologist. Exactly. By working with engineers and learning about biology and having degrees in geology, and that's kind of all came together in your current research work, which is really to understand this interaction of biology and geology in generating gases. You mentioned methane, and there are others, to support biological activity on Earth and possibly elsewhere, right?
Right. So it's funny how over time your own awareness of how your work or the things you're interested in connect to other fields. It helped by walking in and out of the doors of engineering and biology and geology, because then I kept hearing about the problems people are studying and learned to see the connections between those disciplines. So that was probably the best thing that happened to me. And this was all before my PhD. So it did shape the way I approached going back to get a doctorate. And when I decided I wanted to get a doctorate, I knew that I wanted to be able to take courses and work with people in different disciplines. And so I had two advisors one's in engineering, one was in geochemistry. I took a lot of my courses in those TA'd actually in departments like that. And then when I finished my PhD, I moved to a marine biology department to do my postdoc. So I forced myself out of field. I did not know marine biology, so it's a little scary always to jump into another unit or another field you don't know, but there was really cool questions you could study in marine biology from a geo perspective. And so I found most departments are really welcoming of people coming in from the outside, and I've taken advantage of that.
Yeah, and this brings up a really good point in the sense that you did your doctorate thesis in one topic and you started your professional career in another. So, and many students I know worry that by focusing their degrees, getting a PhD, they're just pigeonholing themselves for the rest of their lives, which is not the case. You're the perfect example, right? Going into, marine sciences and then coming back to earth sciences and now astrobiology, down the line. Mm-hmm. So that's cool.
Yeah, I think it's important that it would be too hard to pigeonhole yourself early. And sometimes people know from a very young age they want to answer a certain question, and so then they're seeking the training that gets them there towards that question. But a lot of times, the skills you're developing at one certain stage in your educational career can be applied to wildly different problems. And so I think always staying open to that and feeling the confidence that you can shift direction is really important. And I think a lot of the times you don't need to classify yourself too strongly as one discipline or another, but think about what you bring from your disciplinary training to another field.
Is that something that was self-taught, or did you benefit from mentoring during your academic career while you were at university?
So, yeah, mentoring's a funny word. I've had many great mentors in terms of the fact I had senior faculty or colleagues, people, my boss when I was working and not in school, who opened doors for me when they understood what I was excited about at that moment in time, what I wanted to put my energy into. They were always willing to find a path to help support me in doing that. And so that was a really wonderful form of mentorship. You really need the support often of many other people that have that different perspective or opportunity or connections. One of the things I think about a lot for early career scientists is the amount I was mentored by my peers. And your peer group matters so much. And what you define as your peer group is individual. I mean, we all have our different way of thinking about it. But I was really lucky that in graduate school, in my PhD, and in my postdoc, I worked with really good people, meaning other good students and postdocs, both in the units I was in and then when I go to conferences and meet my community. And those people remain my friends, and they're my colleagues and collaborators going 20 years on for me now. And I respected so much about what they individually were either excited about or had expertise or really creative ideas about. And I think learning to realize how the strengths of your peers, what you can share and bring to each other, how to communicate with each other, collaborate with each other is really important. And then you are going to see these same people, whether you know it or not, year after year. And usually it's positive. So I see it with AbGradCon. I think it's a great forum for students to start to, in a very informal setting, get to know each other and talk about what their work is, and then to see them see each other again year after year. Or I was just at AppSciCon in April, and the number of students that already had a network because they've been going to AbGradCon or other things supported by the NAI or other agencies, so that they felt like they weren't alone and they were so connected and already knew about each other's sciences, and then could be directed to more work that they should go see or people they should talk to. That is really important. So it benefited me that I had a really good peer group, and I still know many of those colleagues, and a lot of us went on professionally into all sorts of different jobs, and we still see each other even though we didn't plan it that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's impossible to be a solo astrobiologist because the themes are so vast that you need input from different disciplines to engage your personal science. And just for those of you who are not familiar with AbGradCon and AppSciCon, AbGradCon is the Astrobiology Graduate Student Conference, which is a conference organized and held only for students. And AppSciCon, the Astrobiology Science Conference, is the big science conference for all astrobiologists that we had this past April, which is always a lot of fun and very interdisciplinary. So, as you mentioned, Alexis, having this ability to talk to people that you're not on topics that you're not an expert in, to kind of inform your personal science is one, very rewarding, and two, extremely stimulating intellectually. So this brings us perhaps a good place to transition to RPL, right, which is a very interdisciplinary collaborative that you lead. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit what RPL is and how it came about.
Yeah. So RPL, Rock Powered Life, that's the name of our team, and we've enjoyed that name. It really works well as an umbrella under which we work. Sanjoy, speaking here, is also a member of RPL, and we're really proud and happy that he was willing to join us back at that time when we were conceiving this. And it's interesting, too, over time between how you propose what you're going to be and what you become. And I'll pretty much speak to what I think we are right now. So collectively, the PIs and the students and the postdocs involved in this project are asking a lot of questions about how rock-hosted life functions, and in particular, the chemical and hydrological processes that give rise to the release of energy from the rock system, and then how biology harnesses that energy and utilizes it, and then the signals that are generated from that, how we'd ever recognize it. But we're really looking at systems where the rock is at the temperature of this room. So there's a deep paradigm about looking at hydrothermal systems where we get both vigorous circulation of water through rocks and heated fluids that help to liberate that energy sources, like making gases such as hydrogen and methane, and then we flush them up into a different environment, like an ocean environment, where there's things that can be reacted with those gases, hydrogen, methane, and oxidize them. And that's one of the most powerful forms of chemotrophic life, is looking for those redox gradients. we're kind of taking a different angle on that, saying that is one beautiful model, and it is a model of where we'd find life on Earth and in our solar system that blooms. Really big explosions of life activity along a black smoke around the seafloor or a lost city system. But there may well be pervasive life throughout the rock system, anywhere water has or is traveling through it. And it does not need to be actually at such high temperatures that there's considerable amount of energy stored there. And if there are pathways to release it, there might be life that's utilizing it in low abundance, but in vast realms. And so that question of how you measure those things, detect them, because they happen slower and at smaller abundances and amounts, and capture those perturbations is one of the big challenges that we're tackling at the moment.
So fascinating, and the reason why I joined the team is because the questions are so interesting. And what's really cool here, and I hope our viewers realize this, is that these studies is exploring environments that are completely detached from light, where biology can live off what only rocks and water. And that's it, at temperatures that are similar to the environments here. So this really begs the question that life is really not restricted to surface planetary environments. What are your thoughts on life on other worlds?
Yeah, well, actually, I have this rock on my desk, because I use it when I'm talking with students a lot, so see if I can get it in the camera. Okay, so here's a chunk of rock. This one came from Wyoming. We go to all sorts of places on the Earth to find similar rocks, which are underneath our ocean floor. But this kind of a rock, which is a peridotite right here, should be present on many rocky bodies. It's on Mars. Should find this in the core of, or the sort of center of Europa and Enceladus, etc. So this rock type, incredibly common, but it's subsurface, like you're saying. So few places on Earth it has been pushed up to the surface, and we can collect that. But we're commonly looking for the life that's in it or fluids circulating through it on many other bodies in our solar system. And it doesn't have to be restricted to our solar system. That's just where we're looking right now. But yeah, so this would be rock-hosted life living in this. And the source of the energy would be derived from this rock, either directly, that's what we don't know. Literally, pretend I want to sustain myself. Can I latch onto this thing and pull essentially electrons from that and use them to drive life? Do I need to circulate water through it and convert them into something like hydrogen or methane and then use it? But there's a lot of interest in how that rock itself is sustaining biological activity in any system that water passes through it. That's the idea, though. You still need water. So it's subsurface life, but water must migrate through the rock. If there's no water movement, then there's no life activity.
So cool. So you mentioned that these rocks are indeed formed in the subsurface, but because of Earth being very dynamic tectonically, so the plates are moving and pushing rocks up and down, in some areas of the world, this type of rock is actually abducted onto the surface for scientists to study. I know you do field work as well, and perhaps could you describe where on Earth these rocks are found and your experience when you visit those rocks.
Yeah. So you started very geological there, saying abducted. No, it's good. So for anybody else just being like shoved up on land, it just got caught in the lingo, so it was interesting. So one classic thing about geologists is you can usually study a lot of things in your backyard, and we tend not to. So if you're an American, you go to Australia or New Zealand, and if you're an Australian, you go to China, and if you're in China, you go over to Afghanistan. And everyone moves to different locations for a good reason to go to these other environments. So like I said, here's a rock from Wyoming, but I'm not actually studying the rock from Wyoming. I have to admit, we have many colleagues working in California. So in RPL and in like the Life Underground NAI, for example, a lot of places in California where there's small slivers of this rock that are near the land surface. I think you, Sanjoy, worked up at I'm blanking
Chromo.
for a second. Yeah, thank you, Chromo. I was trying to say Cedars, but it's like, so you've been working over at Chromo at the moment in the California Coast Range. then we have many members of RPL working at the Atlantis Massif. So they've been on active cruises in the time of our RNAI along the Mid-Atlantic Ridge and at Lost City region, and they're going to return there next year.
So that's in the ocean.
It is on the ocean floor.
Right.
And then in my own research group and with several folks I'm collaborating with in the RPL team and beyond, we are working extensively in Oman, which is on the Arabian Peninsula. So we've been there the last 4 years doing field work, and we're gearing up for a major drilling expedition or drilling activities this winter. So everything we've been doing has been building up towards the stage where we're going to drill into these types of rocks that are exposed near the land surface or at the land surface, and go down about a half a kilometer, and then be recovering both the rock and the fluids there and looking for signs of the chemical and biological activity that we're really interested in.
Where exactly are you drilling?
So it's about 2 hours from the capital of Oman, which is in Muscat. So it's a long way away, but in many ways compared to where I've worked in the high Arctic and in Samoa, places like that, this is way easier to get to. Those all take me days to get even on site. To get to Oman, you do 24 hours of brutal continuous flying, but you do get to Muscat. You're in a beautiful, you're in a nice capital city. You sleep a little bit, and you drive 2 hours into mountains of peridotite. So all of the landscape is this rock. Absolutely spectacularly gorgeous mountains of rock that normally would be deeper in the interior of the earth. And when you're standing there, it's a desert, so it looks dry. But there are existing wells where people have drilled in previously. So in this area of the mountains, you can go down a well, and within about 15 meters, you hit water. And that water extends down hundreds of meters into the subsurface in these kinds of rocks inside the peridotite.
And how do the locals feel when you're there drilling into rocks for not necessarily in oil, because you're in the Arabian Peninsula?
Well, every year is a little different. We have a really lovely time. I mean, the friendliest people I've ever worked with. They're so generous. We work with the Omani Ministry of Water and with the Omani Ministry of Mineral Resources, and they always help support us in getting permitted and equipment we need and things like that. We work on our own, so we're not escorted out there. We're working around the town of Ibra in Oman, and again, everyone in the town there that we've met and in the neighboring villages, very curious about why we're there, what we're working on. We have variable amounts of communication depending on our English-Arabic interfacing that happens at different times. But we go out into these areas where these wells are, and it's publicly available land. We're allowed to camp out there. And the only thing that's kind of funny is if we stay too many days in one place, they're just curious about why. Did we find something really cool? And they're wondering, what it is we're looking for. So many people drive by in their trucks, and they come by and they want to see what we're doing, and they put their hands into the experiments and into the water and try to understand why these Americans or French or Germans, we have a whole, people coming from all over, are so interested in their water. So that's always a funny discussion to have with them. But they're always so friendly. So I absolutely love working down there.
That's so cool. So I'm going to move the conversation a little bit away from your science and onto you, because you're pretty an awesome person, believe it or not. And the reason I say that is because not only you're a fantastic scientist, but you also lead a team of scientists from all over the nation and even the world, and you're a professor mentoring graduate students, and you have a family, you're a mom. How do you juggle all these things together?
Well, you should ask different people. I would say I'm variably successful in juggling all of those things. So I ride roller coasters of what I'm succeeding at managing and which things are dangling on the side and not getting the attention they deserve. So it requires a lot of goodwill of the people you work with and patience, because I have bitten off a lot, and I love the people I'm working with and all of the different projects that we're doing, but they kind of have to each rotate to the forefront at different times depending on their needs. There's also the cyclicity of teaching and field work and research travel, and so again, I really find like that my focus has to keep shifting on what is the priority at that time, or again with students, if new students are coming in or graduating. And this is where people need to really work well in teams, not be alone. If any one person was just dependent on me, for example, that's dangerous. We need to always have networks of people who can step in and contribute to what the overall mission is, I think. So on the work front, it is always complex, but I love it. I mean, I have a great job, and everything I'm doing, I asked to do. So I try to be careful about what I bite off at any moment in time. Now I kind of have a sense of what I can and can't get done. With my family, I'm very protective of that. My kids are 10 and 12 now, so they were born around the time I was the end of a postdoc and beginning of a faculty member. That's a tumultuous time of transitions, but it's also a time where you're really resetting the structure of what your life will look like. And I'm really glad that they were born then, and they've been so integral in the time I've been in Colorado to just the way I manage my whole life, both at home and at work. And I love the fabric of that there's the dynamics of the things I do with my family and being at work and being part of the community that I'm a part of. So, but yeah, it's a challenge, that's for sure.
Yet I can see the enthusiasm ooze out of the camera as you talk about these things, which was great. So, as I go to conferences, I chat with a lot of people, and you do too. And I've had the experiences where many, particularly early career women scientists, are concerned sometimes about putting family first versus career. And you've been very successful doing both. Perhaps you could mention a few more words about how can you have a successful scientific career as a woman in addition to raising a family?
Yeah, I wish there was a formula, which there definitely isn't. And I'm going to broaden it beyond just women in science, but I'll come back to some of those challenges that come with it. Is that I think my overall philosophy is that at any moment in time, the best thing that you can do is be committed and excited about what you're working on then, and to not know necessarily what's coming next. But if you're giving yourself to what you're working on and doing, you'll find that there's paths and weird doors that open that keep adding up and allow you to go along. So then you're sitting there, and it's very hard in that framework to say when is the exact right time to have a family, or how much time do I balance with them. And so again, as an individual, you have to make the decision, are you ready at that time to bring a child in the world or raise kids or do it? And if you've got the will and the energy, you'll find a way. And so you can't let the external world tell you what the right time is. You need to know when you're ready to do that and to dig in. And it's all of these things are always challenging, but if you're committed to it and you're excited and that's what you want to do, you'll find a way. And so people know, oh my gosh, I'm just so not ready to have kids right now, for example, or don't want to, or that's fine. And other people are just yearning inside to do it, so do it. And there isn't a negative repercussion that will come back. You're just going to have to kind of keep scaffolding it and figuring out how to keep the pieces going of things that you care about. I think on the far other end that I've seen, just again with a lot of women of my age, and I'm in my 40s, and who have stepped out in various ways that were running careers in science, education, business, is that it's more challenging if you leave for many years. I have to say that just from what I watched, it does seem to be more difficult if you full on are no longer connected to the communities and the things you're passionate about in your professional life. So if there's just some way, it's not that there's a set scale, but if you can find some fraction of your time energy that you can still commit professionally while you may be more focused at home, and then rebalance these things through time, that I think is another really healthy way to try and move forward. And you need to just ask people for what you need and believe in what you're doing. I think it's really easy to project that externally people are disapproving or expect something different of you, and they really might not be.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Alexis. This is really meaningful. And so we're going to actually open it up for questions, because we've been chatting half an hour. I could chat with you for another 5 hours about rock-powered life and life in general. So our first question comes from Thorin Evans. Hi, Thorin, who asks, do you think we will ever run out of new things to discover in science? I myself am an aspiring scientist and 16 years old. I'm glad you're connecting, Thorin. This is awesome.
Right. Not at all. It's not possible. It's not possible. But to take it even to like a smaller level, one of the things I think about a lot when, let's say, a student or a postdoc or myself, someone's working on an idea they're really excited about, and they sometimes can be stressed that like, oh, someone else is going to discover it or figure it out first or before them. That is something to celebrate, because if you cared about that question and the answer comes out, you're like, yay, now we know this, and then the next question opens up, and there's always the next question beyond the one you're just focused on at that very moment in time or being asked. So there is no limit on our curiosity and where we're going to go with it. And so you just have to be excited about what we do learn so that it opens doors to new questions.
Yep, that's a great answer. And Thorin, you'll realize that the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. So it opens up a whole new doors of investigation. Next question comes from Adam Smith. Hi, Adam. He asks, what kind of techniques are used to measure very small quantities and rates of hydrogen production in rocks? Quite technical. Nice question.
It is technical, and it's really difficult to do. It's really difficult to do. So actually, the lab that Sanjoy has been hosted in with Tori Holler is one of the frontier labs that tries to measure exceedingly small concentrations of hydrogen. And they've been working in systems where they can tell it's sort of held at the threshold of any of our abilities to detect it's there. And they're using various forms of gas chromatography, et cetera, to measure it in the fluids. But there's a lot of tricks to how you ever get the sample from which you want to detect something in it. And this is a big challenge in astrobiology in general, is all the ways we even acquire the samples that really might host the chemical species or the living entity that we're interested in finding. So we are, in our lab, very interested in the development of new sensors for hydrogen that you could maybe place in the environment and detect pulses too, because it's transient. It comes and it goes and it waxes and wanes, which is often due to both geology generating it and biology consuming it, and we want to see that. And so the technology needs to come a lot further right now.
So already to answer this question, it's a strong combination between like geologists and biologists and chemists and engineers to reach those frontiers of science, which is, again, a trademark of astrobiology, is to bring those disciplines together.
Yeah.
So Graham Lau, hi Graham, asks the next question. What's the coolest place you've ever been on the planet? And if you could go anywhere new for fieldwork, where would it be?
Oh, good question, Graham. So for those in the audience, Graham is Dr. Lau is a PhD student with me, and we traveled together to the high Arctic. And I actually absolutely love working in the Arabian Peninsula and in Oman, but I don't think I've ever been anywhere like when we went to the Arctic, which was about 3 years ago. It was summer of 2014. You are so alone in this absolutely beautiful landscape, and even trying to understand what's happening hidden underneath the surface, because it's an icy landscape, but there's a lot going on underneath what we can see well, or if you can even get the images from space versus helicopter versus on foot. So in many ways I would really love to go back there. I've been given chances to go to Antarctica and I've never gone, but I put the high Arctic as number one for where I've been. I did used to dive a lot in the deep ocean. So I used to go down on underwater volcanoes in submersibles. And the technology, the idea of being able to go to some of the deepest parts of the ocean floor when the technology's there, you can't send humans down yet. You got to put an ROV down there. That would be really exciting if I could go one place. I think I'd like to go even deeper than I ever went before.
So you took a submarine and went a few miles under the surface of the ocean to those underwater volcanoes. What does it feel like when you're down there in this protective sphere of titanium? Like what goes through your mind? You're essentially on another planet.
Yeah, so what I found interesting about doing that, we could only go, with the submersible we were in, we could only go up to 2 kilometers deep. That was what it was pressure rated. And this is off of Hawaii and in Samoa. So these are underwater volcanoes on a hotspot chain. And we would dive down the flanks as far as we can go, but they keep going deeper and deeper. So we always had to send ROVs down to the 5-kilometer sites to get samples, and we could only, as humans, go to 2. And you could go outside around, and you could go in. But you can't tell where you're at. You get dropped in, and it goes light, you're in the photic zone, and then it goes dark. And then you have to imagine you're lying on your side, curled into a little ball, your face is around something this big. and the pilot's going, and you basically feel like you're crawling through the darkness with a tiny flashlight, and you can only see what the flashlight illuminates as you go by. So your perspective is not that great, but you have that sense, like you're saying, you're in the sphere, and you're just kind of hanging in there, and you're going by like vents coming up and strange things walking by. So it's a very interesting feeling. I love being down, but it's very physically debilitating, at least for me. So you're down there for 8 hours, and then the CO2 builds up, and you start getting a headache. And then when you get sent up to the surface, the temperatures rise from pretty chilly 50s to 80s. And I travel a ton, but I'm super motion sick, and you're starting to get thrown all around in the top of the ocean. And I just prayed for dear God that I wouldn't throw up inside one of those.
If anything sounds like...
But
hopefully you didn't throw up.
I didn't, but I would hold on for dear life, being like, please, and then they would just pluck me out and put me on the deck of the ship, and I would be dead for like 6 hours, not able to move.
Wow.
So it was cool, but I don't need to do it too many times in my life.
That sounds like just the purest form of exploration, like really discovering new worlds in crazy spacesuits, essentially. So cool,
Yeah,
so cool.
It's the closest I'll get, for sure, yeah.
Yeah. So the next question is by Adam Robinson. Hi, Adam, who also asked a pretty technical question. It's about the recent paper where they used perchlorates in the soil and were able which essentially killed all the microbes, which challenges a little bit the life on the surface of Mars. So I guess, what do you think of that paper and your thoughts on life on Mars?
Ooh. All right, that's a broad one. I'm not sure which of the papers that we're speaking of right now, so I apologize for that. But in general, it's been incredibly fascinating learning more about the massive distribution of perchlorates on the surface of Mars. The implications for what that means for detecting organics and signs of past life. I mean, it really has an incredible effect on our technologies we use, but especially with combustion techniques to measure organics, and the fact that perchlorate obliterates a lot of those signals. Yet how exciting that life can use perchlorate as an oxidant to breathe. And it's there, and it must percolate and move anytime water or brines move through a system. And it's going to be transferred into rocks that have reducing power. And it's also going to be an interface that any methane being released on Mars must flux through. So perchlorate is supremely fascinating in terms of its role that it may be playing in both in the regulation of biology on Mars, both destroying it and sustaining it. And that dichotomy is a very interesting one to explore. So I find all of the continued papers and work on Earth and on Mars about perchlorate really interesting. But I don't have a specific comment on the paper that you're asking about.
So as a geoscientist, your expertise in chemistry becomes very important when understanding what would biology eat and feed off to survive, right?
Right. But, the great thing to think about is we didn't know about perchlorate respiring organisms a few years ago. So we keep learning about biological adaptations, metabolisms, ways of functioning that we didn't suspect often until the history's often been that geologically or geochemically we detect things in the environment, and then we suddenly see their consumption or production, and then we wonder if biology is playing a role in their cycling. And this has happened with many different elements or compounds that are present in natural systems. So geochemistry often sets the framework, and then we get the puzzle of how does biology do it. And that area of what we call environmental microbiology keeps growing rapidly, and it has huge implications for astrobiology and our understanding of what kind of life activity we're even looking for in these different environments.
Right. It almost feels like humans are actually the extremophiles, right? Because we're comfortable at such a narrow range of temperature, pressure, and pH, whereas microbes can be comfortable at these huge ranges of environments. So from the specific, now we go to the super broad. Graham again asks, what excites you the most about the near future of astrobiology and geobiology research?
Wait, say that again, Sanjoy.
What excites you the most about near future of astrobiology? So where is the field going, and what really gets you excited about it? And perhaps focusing a little bit on geobiology as well.
Personally, I think that the potential for detecting, again, forms of life new forms of life and new metabolisms is huge. And we're getting new opportunities because we're starting to probe systems with interesting diversity of both the geology and the complexity of how they function. And the biologists are getting really creative about how to measure whether or not there is any activity. So there's these different nanocalorimetry methods that are coming along that tells you a little bit of heat's been generated and maybe there's a metabolic reaction going on. We need sometimes the signals to tell us there is some kind of electrical or chemical process going on that is driven by life. But then that helps us to go hunt and look for, well, what's mediating it? And it might not look like the traditional sort of cellular physiologies that we've often been contemplating. We keep learning, even when we learned about things like nanowires and ways that organisms transfer electrons and create networks in the environment, that changing sense of how biology can be structured and functioned changes what we look for in the rock or the fluid environment, which also changes how we're going to look and what we're going to look for on other planets. So I feel like that's a really exciting area of active discovery. And on the flip side, the cool thing in astrobiology is that there's the potential to have it more deeply embedded into mission design. And for this next several decades, for astrobiologists to be very vocal and play an active role in the science and the objectives of what those missions are, and really carefully contemplating the data that's being returned from them and looking at it through a different lens. And so I think it's a really rich time of opportunity in astrobiology, but it does require a lot of participation in understanding the potential for different missions and how they're structured. So the more that people can grow into that, the better.
Yeah, science is not only in our labs doing our thing, but it's really participating as a community to where the missions are going to go and what future science will be performed. So thanks for bringing that up. The next question is by Christina, who asked this excellent question. Do you think it is definitely possible to already have 2 kids and be in school for biology and astrobiology and be successful?
Yeah, so that was just a gut level response. So already have 2 kids and be in school now? You mean? Yeah. So the interesting things, because otherwise the sense would be that kids were a hindrance in some way, and they're not. I think whether people decide to have children or they have other areas that they've chosen to dedicate a part of their heart and their time in their life, that is really rich. It makes us the people that we are and our perspectives we bring. We need that balance in there. So there's no detriment there taking away from it. Also, I don't know how old you are, for example, but I see people becoming students in every decade of their life. And what matters is more that they're ready, they want to put their energy towards being trained in a certain area and applying that training and their creativity or their perspectives to answering questions. So say you're going into astrobiology and you have some astrobiology questions motivating you and you're being trained in various biological realms. I think there's a sense often that there's a time frame. Things have to happen on a certain rapidity or scale. And that I have not seen be borne out. That things have to come in an order of how fast and when you meet each career stage and when your family integrates in. So I think it's a lot more about the preparedness and the energy and what you can put out there.
Yeah. And so, Christina, to summarize the answer, it's hell yeah. Of course you can be successful, even with kids. Absolutely.
I started with the short answer.
Yeah. And the beauty of the astrobiology community, at least I find it, it's very collaborative, right? So, and Alexis was mentioning in the beginning the value of having a peer network, right? Where none of us are in this alone, right? We rely on our peers to push our science up. So you'll do the same, and I have no doubt you'll be very successful. The next question is by Lycan Shepherd, who is an undergraduate and working on wanting to do graduate school. And he's, I think, from a small school, MSU Denver, and he was struggling to get into graduate school because he didn't have enough independent research. I guess, so what kind of advice would you give to early careers who are in perhaps smaller schools, don't really have access to independent research, who want to go into research and get a PhD?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's challenging. Just getting into graduate school is challenging because programs aren't as that large, and there's a ton of students interested in it. And then you're asking the question about how to get the independent research experiences. And so if your school doesn't offer them, really the best place is that there are a lot of summer programs, and it takes some deep hunting for those. And then same thing, taking Graham, for example, who is just completing his PhD with me. He had a lot of really interesting experiences that he was at York College in Pennsylvania, but he went elsewhere in both California and in Rhode Island and elsewhere to find a summer internship here and there. And each one of them might not be also directly in an area you're specifically want to study, but a lot of the skills you develop by just going and throwing yourself into a research project that maybe is in another field, but just learning how to come in, understand the nature of the question, how are you going to figure out how to set up some experiments or do calculations or to answer it to some degree, evaluate how well that went. That whole arc is really valuable, and it's valuable to do before you choose to go to graduate school too, to see how much you really want to do that. So I do suggest getting them. There's a reason people want to see the independent research experiences before school, because it helps to really get a sense too of the commitment of the student to follow through. But you might often need to look well beyond the borders of your school and go beyond the borders of your specific interests and just throw yourself in. Much like when you go in the workforce, a lot of times just get a job and start learning to work and commit to the organization you're in and learn how it functions, and then realize over time what are your specific skills and do you need to shift directions. Not everything's about academia, and it's really important actually. The other thing I'd say in all of this is don't be discouraged if you need to go work for a few years. I think working after undergraduate in any capacity in a job is really healthy and makes you think hard about, if you go back to school, why? What do you want to do? And gives you a lot of valuable skills you can apply to back in school if you need them, or do a different job as you realize the ways that you can grow. So I think the direct path right from undergrad to grad is actually something to ponder for anybody. I'm not talking just to you. There's a lot of different ways, and you do not have to be 22, 23, or 24 to start graduate school, and be fine starting it at 30. There's lots of good reasons to do that too.
Yeah, thanks for that, Alexis. And also, don't feel shy about cold contacting professors at different institutions to see if they have possibilities of a summer internship.
Yep.
And so, this happened to me. I had a student contact me from the University of Colorado, out of all places, about wanting to work with me, and the email was really well crafted, very professional. We had a phone call, and now for the second summer in a row, she's in my lab. So there's a lot of value in putting yourself out there, like Alexis mentioned, in terms of finding the research opportunities. But it does take some research as well.
And you're speaking about Shaylin, right?
Yes.
And so, just to admit for anyone out there that gets discouraged, so I feel really bad. Shaylin wrote to me lots of times and I didn't write her back. She did work with Sanjoy. She came here and I met her and she's wonderful. And then she found another faculty member. She did some great research here with him. And I think the perseverance of just putting yourself out there and talking about what you'd like to do, you'll find weird connections of how you can find a home in that. And don't be discouraged if there's people who are being bad like me and haven't written you back.
The next question is from Graham, and I'm going to ask you your question, Graham, in a second. But I wanted to touch a little bit, Alexis, about your experience in the high Arctic also, because that sounded really interesting. I was also transfixed when you described your experiences in the submersible. I was kind of picturing it in my mind what it looked like. It was a great image. So what brought you to the high Arctic in the first place? What kind of biology is there? And then I guess I want to also touch your senses, what you see, what you smell, what you hear when you're in these extreme environments.
So when I first came to the University of Colorado, I had the joy of interacting with Bob Pappalardo, who is now the lead for the Europa Multiple Flyby Mission, or Clipper. And we co-advised our first PhD student together. And she was working on a project in the high Arctic at a place called Fjord Pass. And we, over the last decade, have continued to grow the research there. So Graham, who's been asking some of the questions, is integral part of work we're doing up in the high Arctic. I hadn't been myself, nor had Graham, who was doing it. So this was our first trip up there. but we were going up there because there is a system up there of where the ice is covered in minerals, and the minerals are elemental sulfur, and you can see these yellow sulfur deposits from space. And they're anomalous. It's the only place on Earth where we see them. And they really shouldn't be there. They shouldn't persist. They shouldn't be chemically stable. So there's a question of where'd they come from, how are they forming, and why are they still persisting? And we had many hypotheses that biology was playing a role in both their formation and then capturing and maintaining them there. And the only way to test that, we'd done a lot of remote sensing data, and from different orbital scales, we needed to do the work in field and look for the origin of the minerals, the fluids, and whether they're what ways biology was dynamically behaving. So we were really fortunate the exobiology program funded us to go up there for a 3-week summer expedition. And you travel 3 days up in ever smaller planes, and then you get on a small one with all your stuff for the 3 weeks or the 2 more weeks you're going to be up there, and they drop you and say goodbye. But we had a helicopter that does the last bit, and I realized I love helicopters. I never guessed I would have liked helicopters being motion sick, but they're just amazing. You're up and you're flying down around and just getting the glimpses, in our case, of all this sulfur all over the landscape. So, but you're up there in an Arctic landscape, you're hearing glaciers pop and groan and rivers roaring by, ripping the both the ice and the rock away. You're pretty much drinking dirt water most of the time because it's all the silts and other things that are coming by and whatever freeze-dried foods you can have. We all slept in our own tents because we all smelled and we all wanted to be away from each other, so we were all just littered onto the landscape in different places. And every day you got up and you got dressed and you put on your gear and you walked the ice. And we walked all over that landscape as much as we could. But that's definitely a really beautiful place, and you just don't see anyone. You don't even see wildlife. You're just alone.
That's so cool. I wish I could experience that one day. So we're running out of time, but I'm going to ask you one last question, and it stems from Graham's. Astrobiology is a very interdisciplinary topic that attracts a lot of attention from the public because it asks those fundamental questions. Where do we come from? Where are we going? Is this life further away from Earth? And what are your thoughts in the role of astrobiology in connecting with the public in terms of awareness of science?
Oh, it's so powerful. One of my most fun experiences was going to a 4th grade classroom a year ago. And I just brought a globe. And I was talking a little bit about the places I've worked and traveled. But I said, can you tell me somewhere on Earth where you don't think there's life? And the kids are sitting there and trying to imagine what those places would be, which, let's pretend they say inside a volcano or outside of it or here. And then they just naturally started to ask questions about other bodies in our solar system and other states of what an environment could look like, and the questions that just poured out of them. I literally needed 5 minutes with the globe, and then they talked the rest of the time, and I just redirected their questions and the rest. So that's at the 4th grade level. But then if I talk with just any family member or member of the public about the places we go and where we're searching for water, what kind of life forms we're searching for in the water and the rest, their own imaginations capture that and then run in very interesting directions. And with no scientific training, they can ask such pointed, good questions about things we don't have answers to. And so astrobiology is really a potent way of increasing people's both interest and excitement about science and in all the ways it can be applied. So that's really struck me over the years, how powerful that is.
This is almost a very nice place to leave this conversation, but perhaps I would invite you to, if there's anything else you wanted to add or some advice for early career scientists that we've not already touched on.
That's a good question. I think it's just coming back around to this sense of it's really hard to chart a path in these fields, and you shouldn't feel the pressure to. I think, again, what you want to be able to do is have a voice at any table. If something that your ideas or things you've been trained to do that could contribute to the discussion. You do not need to be the master of all. It is too hard. and you've got to be okay with all the things you don't know. I was nervous, honestly nervous, when I had to take over certain roles in astrobiology, because there's so much I don't even know about within the field. And yet, on the other hand, when I go to any of these different forums, and they could be small meetings to large conferences, depends on what we've been convened to do, I realize that I have a perspective and something to contribute and say. And that can help change the course of what we're trying to do, or how we're doing it, or why we're doing it. So take it in little bites, is what I'd say. And I feel like here I am, I call myself mid-career, and I don't know what's going to happen in the next 20 years, but I know I'm really excited about what I'm doing right now. And I look back 20 years earlier, and I would never have guessed that I'd be doing what I'm doing today, but I was really committed to what I was working on at the time. So just committing yourself and really digging into that moment is my biggest piece of advice.
Thank you, Alexis, so much. And thank you so much for taking the time to come with us today. And we know you're a very busy scientist and teacher and mentor and all the other great things you do. And so the time you took to speak with us today was absolutely fantastic. I learned a lot and received a lot of wisdom from you. Thank you. Those of you who are watching, thank you for connecting with us. It was awesome, and the questions that came were fantastic. So join us next month for Ask an Astrobiologist. And please, until then, stay curious. Bye.